All right, we are going to get started. I'm sure there's still people who are going to be trickling in, but good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How Connecticut's New Cybersecurity Law Impacts Your Business. My name is Ashley Zane. I'm a Government Affairs Associate here at CBIA. And as we all know, cybersecurity has become a hot topic as we move towards digitizing and modernizing systems, which are not always foolproof as highlighted by recent media coverage. Cyber threats impact businesses regardless of industry or size and can have detrimental effects on the overall health of a business. As a result of recent events, the state government has decided to take a keen interest in ensuring that personal information is protected, not only to protect the consumer, but also to continue to instill consumer confidence within the business community. The past legislative session, we saw changes to state law when it comes to cybersecurity, and we will likely see additional changes in the upcoming session, which begins in February of 2022. With that said, I'm really excited to be joined by Sherwin Yoder and Chris Wisneski. Chris is a manager at Whittlesey for more than 20 years in the IT industry, specializing in cybersecurity. With career focused in governmental and nonprofit organizations, Chris is a member of countless associations, including the Information Systems Audit and Control Association, Information Systems and Security Association, and the Terrorism Information New York Group. Sherwin is a partner at Carmody Torrance Sandak Hennessey. As a certified privacy professional, Sherwin counsels clients in the areas of data privacy and cybersecurity. Sherwin regularly coaches businesses, unions, law firms, institutions, and healthcare providers through incident investigation, breach notification, and responding to regulators. Please feel free to ask questions at any point during the webinar through the chat function, and we will address them at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. So with that, Chris and Sherwin, take it away.
Thank you, Ashley. I guess I'll get us started, and Chris will advance the slides. Thanks in advance, Chris. You can go ahead and advance to the next slide.
Hey, there we are.
All right, let's talk about the trend. Get right in. So the background to the Connecticut laws we're going to talk about is that there's a national trend. Every state now has laws. They also have, in many cases, affirmative security requirements for certain industries to implement. They also have environmental laws now in Illinois, Washington, California, and some other places. Of course, monitoring and surveillance has always been big. But the latest trend is really toward a comprehensive treatment of personal data. So folks may remember back in May of 2018, you saw a lot of emails from your service providers and companies that you do business with, updating their privacy policies. That was in response to GDPR, or the European General Data Protection Regulation. And that was really the first most well-known comprehensive data privacy regime. And California followed suit soon thereafter. So 2 years now, California, through the CCPA, or California Consumer Privacy Act, have afforded California residents comprehensive, substantive rights in their personal data. Defined very broadly. Virginia and Colorado are the latest additions. Connecticut, and those will come online in 2023. Connecticut has had a comprehensive Consumer Privacy Act on the legislative session, the last couple sessions that I can remember, and got pretty far in the session this most recently. I expect that we'll see something coming down the pike in the next legislative session too. So this is just to give you an idea that this is the trend. Privacy rights are related to cybersecurity. They have to be protected by cybersecurity. There's no federal standard yet in terms of a consumer privacy right. It's always half a dozen or more bills in Congress trying to target that too. Some major obstacles, which we're not going to talk about today. What do these comprehensive acts provide? Right, the rights that you're probably already familiar with or heard about, so-called right to be forgotten. For example, the right to have your personal data deleted on a request, the right to opt in or opt out of certain marketing campaigns, things like that, right? Restrict how companies use personal data.
Hey, Sherwin?
Yeah.
I don't mean to hop in. You're cutting out pretty bad, actually. It's getting kind of tough to understand. So it seems when you're closer to the mic, we can hear you a little clearer.
Okay.
That's better right there.
Thank you, Chris. So
much better.
Yeah, normally I participate in these things from my phone, but which is a better microphone. I was forced today to use the laptop. So thank you for bringing me back online, Chris. So it's just going over the substantive rights that these comprehensive laws provide. Some of them give the consumers right to correct their data, to get a copy of the data that the company has, and enables them to carry it with them. They want to take the data to a competitor and have the competitor use their data. It's fine. So that's the kind of things, the obligations that businesses are going to have to face in with this environment of consumer privacy rights, managing opt-ins, making sure you're documenting how old the user is, if you need to get permission from parents, etc. Making sure you have the right public-facing privacy notices on your website, outlining the rights that consumers and users of your site have, conducting risk assessments on some periodic basis. You know, if you're thinking of launching a new product or a new marketing campaign, some of these laws might require you to conduct a so-called privacy impact assessment to see how that new business or promotion is going to impact consumer privacy rights, and so on and so forth. So that's just a background. Next slide, Chris. There we go. So these are the two laws that we're going to talk about today. The stick and the carrot, it's just sort of a cute way to remember that it's not all bad news. Some of it is expanding privacy obligations for business in terms of the breach notification law, but also there's an incentive here for business to get healthier from a cybersecurity perspective and adopt cybersecurity frameworks. So we're going to talk about that. Next slide. So these are the ways that the stick is operating to expand the definition of personal information. So before, you had to worry about, as a business, what kinds of personal information require me to report in the event of a data breach. So it used to be just social security number, driver's license, bank or payment card and payment account information, credit card information, obviously. But as of October 1, that's been expanded now to include these other categories that you see with biometric information, medical information, health plan information. To the extent that you offer users, online profiles and accounts, or you gather that information from them, a login, username, password, that stuff is also now covered as personal information and would require breach notification activity in the event of that those were compromised. Individual taxpayer identification, government IDs, passports, etc. Also, IRS issued identity protection, personal identification number. So you have people who've already suffered identity theft and they've had to reconstruct their lives, and they get special identity from the IRS to distinguish them from the ones who have impersonated them, filed tax returns for them. You have to protect that information too, obviously. Next slide.
And Sherwin, you may even say it in the next, oh, there it is. Overlapping. I was going to say some of these obviously have a little bit of overlapping when we talk about the federal tax information, some of the Hipaa stuff, but it does kind of overlap with Connecticut and regulatory.
Yes, absolutely. So these are some of the additional amendments under the data breach notification law. So it used to be you first of all, you've always had as a business the obligation to respond to a data breach without unreasonable delay. And on the outside of that, there was a 90-day limitation, so that whatever you think of as reasonable or unreasonable, you had to notify within 90 days of discovering the data breach. Now that's been compressed to 60 days. So we're down to a 60-day notification period. So this really emphasizes the importance of being prepared and having a response plan, which we'll talk about in a few moments. It's always required a 2-year, or most recently has required a 2-year identity theft services, offer victims of data breach to the extent that their social security numbers have been involved. Now that little subcategory has been expanded to include taxpayer identification breaches. So if you have a SSN breach or a taxpayer ID breach, you're going to have to offer 24 months of identity theft services complimentary. There's special treatment for online breaches of online account information, coordinating Hipaa notification. So Chris just referred to Hipaa. If you're a Hipaa covered entity, or maybe you are a business associate of a Hipaa covered entity, and you have certain obligations, your contract, your business associate agreement with the covered entity to help with breach notification or to take on those responsibilities, just know that you do get some credit under this statute for complying with the Hipaa breach notification rule. But there are some additional things you might have. For example, notifying the Attorney General. The nice thing about the amendment is it's clearer now that to the extent you engage a forensic investigator and you are required to submit that report, their investigation report, to the Attorney General's office, that information is now protected under a FOIA. So
you're starting to cut out again, Sherwin. Yeah.
So there's a FOIA exemption to the extent you have to do a forensic investigation report. Is that clear?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, so that's a good thing. Next slide. So here's the carrot. I should say at the end of that, and with respect to your breach notification, there's no private cause of action. So under that breach notification statute, who enforces it is the Connecticut Attorney General. Now, the Attorney General does have authority to, issue penalties and fines and investigate and punitive damages, or to sue under the Connecticut Unfair Trade Practices Act. However, what we're going to talk about now is the area of private enforcement. So when there's data breaches these days, you see a lot of class actions. Those are typically founded on negligence or common law torts, complaining that the company's cybersecurity is subpar or unreasonable, that they didn't use reasonable safeguards to protect the consumer data. So Public Act 21-119 is the carrot for cybersecurity in Connecticut. It covers all businesses, all organizations, for-profit, nonprofit. And what it provides is immunity from punitive damage. So if you were a business, you suffered a data breach, and you got sued by third parties, consumers perhaps, and they alleged punitive damages. If you have a written cybersecurity framework as enumerated in the statute, then you are most likely protected from the punitive damages claim. So you might still have to pay out compensatory damages to the extent that the plaintiffs can prove they've suffered compensatory damages, but you're not going to be on the hook for punitive damages, which is really the element that's like the multiplier of damages, and can be a significant incentive. So it uses very similar personal information definition and expands the application of personal information to include IP addresses and other types of identification numbers, device identifiers that might lead to the identification of an individual. So it's a little broader and reaches a little further than Breach Notification Act in terms of what constitutes personal information. What does it mean to maintain a written cybersecurity program? Next slide. So the statute says a cybersecurity program must conform to one or more, quote, industry recognized cybersecurity frameworks. And then it lists them. And the ones you see here are the ones that are listed in the statute. The NIST cybersecurity framework is probably one of the better known frameworks, but each of these here identifies industry standards for implementing a written cybersecurity program. And you say, well, what if I'm already complying with the cybersecurity regulation? Like I'm a Hipaa covered entity, or I'm a banking institution or financial institution under one of the Graham-Leach-Bliley regulations. Next slide. So you get credit for that too. The statute is written so that if you're complying with these regulations, or in the case of the payment card industry, data security standard, self-regulation, then you are in compliance with this statute and you can take advantage of the safe harbor. Just take care to be sure that you're up to date with the program. So any changes to the regulations, updates to those NIST standards, for example, you'd want to make sure that those are implemented within 6 months of their publication. And if that's the case and you're keeping that maintained within 6 months, then you are within the safe harbor. Next slide.
Sherwin, so how would somebody, I guess, sorry to put you on the spot, how would somebody know if there were changes to the NIST framework?
Well, that's a good question. The source for their, NIST publishes its frameworks for, with the example of NIST, they publish their changes, publicly. They have it on their website. And I would suggest that whoever is adopting those standards would get on whatever feeds are available for keeping track of what NIST is up to. I'm pretty sure, although I'm not following them on Twitter, I'm pretty sure you could find them on Twitter.
Probably.
Just keep track of whatever organization it is that you're using their standard. Next slide. So what do you do now? And this is my closing slide here before we pass it on to Chris. These are some of the things that you can do now. Obviously, we're beyond October 1, which is when these statutes took effect, these amendments. But these are the things that you should be doing to respond and to take advantage of the safe harbor and to comply with the data breach notification expansions. Do you know where and how you're handling each of the new categories of personal information? So that's data mapping and taking an inventory of, okay, do we collect these new categories of information? Are we collecting them? Where are they? Where do they reside? Where does that data reside? Just so you have a comprehensive view of where the risks are. Do your public-facing notices signal to consumers that you recognize your expanding obligations regarding their data? So make sure your privacy policies are up to date. Update your employee-facing policies and your internal policies and procedures. Do your data classifications now correspond with the new categories of personal data? And you enabled IT to maintain industry standard technical and physical safeguards. Does your incident response plan, your IRP, incident response plan, account for the new notification period? No longer 90 days, it's now 60 days. Is it up to date so that I'll be able to act quickly and comply with that compressed time period? Does it address the coordination of compliance obligations with a HIPAA related breach or a similar regulation? Do your service provider contracts need to be updated to address the new definitions and the parties' respective responsibilities if there is an incident that originates with the vendor? And do you have cybersecurity insurance? Obviously, it's very important to get that. I can't emphasize it enough. Clients that go through incidents that I've helped coach them through that didn't have insurance have it now, and do some other things now that they wish they had in place before. So cybersecurity insurance is very important, and I highly recommend speaking with an experienced cyber insurance broker who can address your particular needs. And that's a whole nother webinar, really. Cyber coverage. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really gone through the roof. Lots of companies that were into it are now getting out of it because starting to experience the losses. So does your coverage need to be updated? Think about that. And Chris, I'll turn it to you. Thanks.
Actually, that's a perfect segue because I can speak to the cyber insurance. Can't stress enough what Sherwin is saying in regards to the fact that, you really need to look at having cybersecurity insurance. I could just say for the last couple breaches that Whittlesey has investigated, most clients don't have it, and you're paying out of pocket. And if you're a small business, some of these, for example, a 3-person law firm experienced ransomware, was out of business for a couple days. That wasn't the biggest impact. It was the hundreds of people that their data was exposed and had to be reported. And then you have to offer, the credit monitoring, which is really an expensive chunk when you get into paying out at the end of this. And so by the time this firm is done, you're looking at over easily with remediation, investigation, reporting, breach coaching, the privacy attorney, in excess of $75,000. And that's a lot out of pocket for a small business. We saw a recent one that was, a 16-person provider, and there was, tendency that it could be up to several $100,000 that they have to pay out of pocket. And, it's a big hit. So, we really encourage people, get that cybersecurity insurance. It's reasonable. It's not something that's going to break the bank, but it's a lot easier to pay $5,000 out of pocket as a deductible, or even $10,000 as opposed to $50,000 in excess. So one thing I say is don't use that as a preventative measure. What I'm saying is don't say, oh, I have cybersecurity insurance, I don't need any of these other controls. Absolutely not. That is not okay. You just need this in the event that you possibly need to remediate from an incident. So let's move on to my slides. So we talk about a cybersecurity program. What is it, right? What does it entail? I'll kind of delve into that a little bit. We'll kind of talk about what it contains, what components are there. I'm also going to give you a little bit of things that you really should implement, just best practices. It goes a long way. So, there's different words we hear: the cybersecurity program, the written information security program, the information security program. Sometimes it's referred to as an information risk program. Bottom line, they're all the same thing. Okay, there's different names for them, but at the end of the day, it's a overall umbrella of a program that has a set of security controls that you've implemented at your organization, that you can show that you're protecting your client data or even some of your employee data, but you're taking good measures to ensure that you're going to try and prevent a data breach by all means. And also, if there is one, unfortunately, they're becoming more common, that you have actions in place to respond to it and how that's going to be done. So, really what we're trying to protect, as you can see, is the little table over there shows, is the confidentiality of your data, right? Making sure that it doesn't get exposed or leaked. When we talk about the availability, if there is an outage, part of that is you're going to refer to your disaster recovery plan and business continuity plan. How are we going to operate? How am I going to access everything in the event that there is some kind of disruption to the business? And then obviously with the integrity of the data, we're speaking to the fact that we don't want that data to be compromised, altered, changed. It needs to stay in the same state. So that's kind of overall what a cybersecurity program is. If you want to talk about an effective program, couple key points here that I put in this slide is, IT governance. IT governance is extremely important, right? Because when we talk about risk management, if you are not evaluating your risk or what kind of cyber risk you have, then you're kind of setting yourself up for failure. I mean, we can't just sit there with blinders on this day and age, especially with small to medium-sized business, right? So your small to medium-sized businesses last year in 2020 were the target, over 60% of attacks were targeted at small to medium-sized businesses below 100 people. So, attackers are starting to figure out that, hey, these smaller firms don't have the funding that they, could afford for this big, robust security program. And so they're really attacking the smaller companies. So, I hear from a lot of people, well, I'm not worried about it. They're not coming after us. Well, yes, they are actually. And you really should be on guard. So when we talk about that risk management and oversight, it's, Sherwin alluded to it earlier. Are you having an annual IT risk assessment done? Are you doing a cybersecurity assessment that really looks at your overall infrastructure, your policies and procedures, your network? What kind of vulnerabilities are there? And then you get an actual assigned cyber risk score. So you kind of know where you fall in the range in comparison with other industries. One of the advantages to doing that is, we talked about cybersecurity insurance. It's just like anything else. If you have safeguards in place, it's going to lower your risk. Therefore, it's going to lower your premium when you go to apply for cybersecurity insurance. Unfortunately, we've seen an uptick in claims because more people are getting the insurance. There's more attacks. So what happens now is obviously the insurance goes up a little, but that's the same with anything else. So, we talk about the risk assessments. Doing it not only helps you identify, but it also lowers your premium for your insurance. Second thing is threat intelligence, collaboration. Do we have internal and external resources that we're really working with other firms? Are you aware of what's out there? What are the new threats? Do we know where these hackers are trying to target now? What's the new and upcoming attacks? We hear about ransomware a lot. It's probably in the news a little bit more over the last couple of years. And really what they're doing with that is they're coming at at your organization and they're taking your data and they're holding it literally ransom. They're holding it captive. They'll encrypt it and they hold the decryption key and they want you to pay a ransom. Okay. And they're not cheap anymore. They used to be pretty expensive. They used to be sometimes we've seen, $5,000, $10,000. Well, now they're getting up to in the millions. So, understanding what the new threats are, what are the new vectors of attack, and collaborating both with your internal IT and also maybe some experts that are out there or some kind of cybersecurity blogs or news, just so you can stay aware. The thing that Sherwin mentioned earlier, he alluded to the third-party service providers that you have. A very important thing that's becoming more and more prominent is a solid vendor risk management program. Nowadays, more companies are moving to the cloud, right? So, when we talk about the cloud, basically it's you're no longer in control of your data in essence. So, for example, Microsoft Office 365 is a cloud platform, right? You're accessing your email, but it actually sits at Microsoft. So yes, you have access and you can, control some of the security around it, but the data actually resides elsewhere. So, when we have cloud providers like that, if you have, multiple, you really should be doing kind of like a risk assessment on your vendors. You need to know, are they really putting security in place to protect my data? I'm trusting them to host it. I'm trusting for that availability and confidentiality. So, put the onus back on them. And one way that you could do that is we have what's called SOC audits that are done on these big companies that house data and cloud providers. It's a service organizational control. It's a pretty big audit. and you'll see more cloud providers get it on an annual basis. What that does is you really want that SOC 2 Type 2. But the key there is that is an audit that's going to specifically look at the security controls that that vendor has in place. And the key there is it's going to show any deficiencies. It will tell you they have to put it in the report if they fail to control. And that should be a red flag for you. There's a small little piece in there that you as an organization need to pay attention to, and that's end user considerations, right? And that's saying, okay, we're doing all of this over here, but you need to make sure that you're doing X, Y, and Z to ensure that we're in collaboration and you're doing your part for putting security in place. I'll just tell you, some of them could be god-awful boring. I mean, if you struggle with insomnia, this will cure it, trust me. But if you're not comfortable reviewing them, consult a cybersecurity expert. Let them, help you out with that and review them, because they'll know exactly what to identify and look for. And then last, we talk about, the key piece there is that incident response plan. More and more states are requiring something like that. We talk about it with Hipaa. If you do business with clients in Massachusetts, they require that there's an incident response plan in place. And this is different from your disaster recovery plan. And I'll talk about that, I think, on one of the next slides. So I won't go too much in depth with this, because one of the things that's mentioned in the law is that you need to use a identified, industry standard framework. So there's a bunch of them in here, right? NIST is obviously the big one. That framework pretty much covers everything across the board. That's really what people use as the gold standard. So if you're following their framework, everything else underneath is probably going to follow suit. There's the Center for Internet Security, also a great resource and framework. So what we're saying is when you're building out your cybersecurity program, if you're trying to implement security controls, these frameworks identify what you need to have in place and how you can measure them. That's why they're there as a resource. ISO 27001, another great standardization for a framework. We can get into FedRAMP when we get into federal requirements. And then we have the regulatory that, some of you may comply with. I'm not sure the businesses that are on here, but your Hipaa, the security rule, breaks down exactly what you need to implement for technical safeguards. Same with financial institutions for the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. It talks, about what you need to do for any safeguards in place, and obviously for PCI for credit cards. And there's many others, but these are just examples of what are key, industry standard frameworks that you could reference when, you're looking to build out your cybersecurity program. So here's an important slide. I hate loading slides with information. I mean, it drives me nuts, but I know that a lot of times we share these slides with people so you can use this as a resource and something to fall back on. So that's why we kind of add this. Excuse me one second. So these are some of the key components that you really should have as part of your cybersecurity program. The overarching document, that information security program document, outlines everything that you're going to have. So it alludes to the acceptable use policy, disaster recovery, business continuity, all the ones I kind of mentioned below. And it has talks about, administrative, technical, and physical safeguards that you have in place. And that's the one that really outlines everything. So that's the kind of umbrella document, I guess. Your acceptable use policy. A lot of people have this in place. It's really their employee handbook of do's and don'ts and what you should do and what you should do with the data that you're handling every day and your internet usage, email usage. That's really what that document is. Your disaster recovery plan, as I mentioned before, this is, in the event of a disaster, the building caught fire and you can't really get into your building and you still need to work. Do the servers still work? Can I still get my data? And that's where you get into a lot of your backup and planning. Business continuity, again, how are we going to operate in the event of an outage or an interruption? Well, I think we've all experienced a pretty good interruption over the last almost 2 years. Never did we think we were going to be working from home and remotely permanently, at least for the last year and a half or so. So I think that was something that alerted a lot of people to, wow, we probably should have a business continuity plan. How are we communicating with people? How are we resuming business? How are we going to work remotely and still access everything securely and safely? And so this is a key one that really is important to pay attention to. Incident response plan, I'm going to cover that in the next slide. Security awareness program. If there's anything that you do security-wise at the end of the day is security awareness. You need to be doing ongoing phishing campaigns, educate your employees, because if you don't, you're really setting them up for failure. It's your responsibility to make sure they're aware of how to spot these. We talked a little bit about that vendor management program already. And on one of the slides above, I know that Sherwin mentioned that data classification. This is becoming more important because as we see breaches and we're investigating breaches, a lot of people, hey, it's one mailbox. Well, we don't really do anything with sensitive information. And we do a scan, and all of a sudden there's a couple hundred pieces or incidents of that person identifiable information. And it's kind of a shock. And what happens is people don't realize the data they've been collecting. They don't even know what they have. So it's really important to understand what data you're dealing with. What falls under that is your retention policies. It kills me when we look at these breaches and there's information dating back to literally 2002, 2003. Why do you have things that are 18 years old in your mailbox, for example? There's got to be better hygiene there. So data classification is really important because at the end of the day, what are we protecting? The data. That's really what it comes down to. And you're really trying to protect yourself. The key piece here also is designate a privacy officer that is responsible for the program. So we need to make sure that we don't just create this WISP and put it in place and never look at it. It's got to be updated. It's got to be reviewed. Should be shared with your employees on an annual basis so that they sign off and say, yes, I acknowledge that I read this and this is what I have to adhere to. And that's that whole thing of reviewing it annually. Or if there's big changes, it's a fluid document. So you may add some policies into your written information cybersecurity program. These are just some of the key components. There could be a lot more. So that incident response plan, really, again, it's a set of instructions. It's really a guideline it's different from a disaster recovery. This is more of a network security incident. So we talked about a virus, malware, ransomware, phishing, things like that. So any unauthorized access to your systems, that's what that incident response plan is. How am I going to address this? How am I going to identify how they got in? How am I going to remediate this? What security controls do we need to fix post-incident? So there's a lot that goes into that. And so having a solid incident response plan is really important so that when it happens, you're not scrambling trying to understand what to do. So, with these is you have the propensity for a large data loss. And, I guess at the end of the day, as I tell a lot of our clients, really we're here to make sure we keep your name out of the paper. That reputational loss is going to do more damage than you can imagine once your name is in the paper. So protecting that data and knowing how to ensure what data was exposed or what was involved or included in that unauthorized access is a piece of the incident response plan. So that's a key piece that we need there. And as you can see at the bottom, it's just exponentially growing, right? It's increased by 141%. And we're seeing more and more data become compromised and get out into the public. And at the end of the day, it's worth money. That's why people are stealing it. They sell it on the dark web and they make money off it. Talked a little bit about that security awareness program. Just make sure that you're doing ongoing training. You know, we find just small little snippets, maybe a 6 or 7 minute training module every quarter for your employees instead of the 45 minutes. Because yes, even I in cybersecurity will say, I am not looking forward to taking a 45-minute session, you know, every quarter. But just make sure that people are aware and doing ongoing phishing tests. You should be doing those at least monthly so people are aware. You know, 90% of these attacks come in through phishing. And so that's an important piece, and ensuring that it's ongoing. So as we get to the end and close up here, like I said, these are just some best practices, right? Is having that cybersecurity and IT risk assessment performed on an annual basis. Or maybe you don't, you know, some of the smaller organizations, maybe every other year is reasonable. But it's really important to understand your risk and what you're exposed to. You've probably heard it over and over, but it's almost mandatory. And we're actually seeing cybersecurity insurance companies, in order to write a policy, they will actually mandate that you have multi-factor authentication turned on. And this is becoming bigger and bigger. Why? Because people are working remotely. So when your folks are accessing the network remotely, let's say they're coming in through a VPN, a virtual private network, and they're, you know, authorized using network credentials, there should be a second layer of authentication. There should be some kind of, you know, maybe it's a text code that gets sent to your phone and they put the code in, or something like a third-party app that says, hey, is this you? You can deny it or approve it. So that multi-factor is really important, specifically on mail. It will block almost 95% of phishing attacks, because maybe that attacker gets your credentials and, you know, they start typing that in, but all of a sudden it realizes it's coming from a login that it's not familiar with. It's going to send that, you know, prompt to your phone, and at 6:30 at night while you're eating dinner, if that comes up, it's a pretty good indication that you're probably not checking email and there might be an incident. So it would stop right there, because the attacker doesn't have your phone. It doesn't have the ability to get that second layer, and it will prevent that. Email encryption, really important. Making sure that when you're sending data in transit, that it's encrypted and it's not just wide open for people to sniff out. File transfer protocols, as we mentioned, you know, we try not to share things in email because that's where we see breaches with information sitting in there. Use something like a share file, a file genius, Dropbox for business. It's a secure encrypted location that you can share information with clients or whomever. You control the login credentials and how long the information sits there, and it's a much more secure way. Vendor management, we talked about. Endpoint protection, obviously, making sure you have good protection around your firewalls, and antivirus, anti-spam, things like that. So, you know, what are the action steps? You know, make sure you look at your current policy, right? Evaluate them, see what you have in place. Maybe you don't have to start from scratch. Maybe you already have some. Make sure you designate that privacy officer. That's very important. And again, just, you really need to document everything. It's got to be in writing so that you can provide evidence that, hey, we are doing this. We have something in place. One of the things, you know, I tell you is, you can find templates to start with, because most people say, where do I even go? You know, we Whittlesey can provide some templates to you folks if anybody would like, so that you're not starting from scratch, because it could be overwhelming. And the other thing I'll say last before we go to questions is, these don't need to be massive. You're looking at this and you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be really expensive and a lot of work. It doesn't have to be. That's the purpose of it. It's scalable. So it scopes down to the size of your business, right? It doesn't have to be some massive document. It could be something very simple, but at least you have something in place. So, all right, I just threw a lot of information there. I just really went through. So are there questions? What do we have here?
Yeah, so I did get a few questions in the chat. The first one is to both of you. Historically, where do you see the biggest gap within a company's cybersecurity program?
You want me to kind of start that, Sherwin?
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead, Chris.
The biggest security gap, we see a lot of people that don't do security awareness. They don't take that seriously. And so, a lot of CIOs, you'll see it when, a lot of, just drew a blank, but you'll see when they do surveys that a lot of CIOs and executive directors, they view their employees as a last line of defense at the end of the day behind other security controls. And we're trying to change that dynamic. They're actually the first line of defense. They're the ones that are clicking. They're the ones that are giving out data. So we want to make sure that we're equipping our workforce and educating them on a lot of these threats and how to handle data securely and what their responsibility is. With that, we also encourage and foster, we don't want people to be scared to report if they clicked on something. We want them to feel comfortable that, hey, you know what, you screwed up. The sooner you tell us, because as it, Sherwin talked about, security incidents, now you only have 60 days to report it. You don't want to let something sit for a while, and then there's a lot more explanation as to why it took so long. The other thing that we see is people are not using multi-factor authentication. I mean, that's a huge issue. It's just a must this day and age. It's not an option. It's just a best practice. And the other thing is people fail in doing cybersecurity assessments or risk assessments because they think, oh my gosh, this is huge. It's very expensive. It doesn't need to be. It's scalable, but you must do them to identify your cyber risk. How else are you going to know?
Yeah, I would echo what Chris said, especially emphasizing the first 2 points. Invest in your employees. That is definitely the biggest area of attack and weakness, and could be turned into a strength. If they feel like they're being educated and enlisted as a soldier against the war against cybercrime, that's the best thing, because so many of the attacks that I see and that I respond to are email account takeovers and situations where an employee has input their login credentials to a site they thought was for business, for business purposes. It looked like it was DocuSign maybe, or whatever. And then they don't realize until months later sometimes that their credentials were harvested, and now there's all kinds of malware being put on the system, or the system is being surveilled, or eventually they could start a ransomware attack. So investing in employee awareness and training, anti-phishing campaigns are I know Chris is a proponent of KnowBe4. That's something our firm uses, and I recommend. There are other brands, automated services that will try to phish your employees, and then you can highlight challenges, you turn them into training opportunities, and that kind of thing. And you can also document how you're doing. It's kind of satisfying to see the organization go from down here to up here in terms of the people successfully passing the phishing tests. So that's employee awareness, definitely. The multi-factor. I mean, every breach I've ever responded to where we've had breach notification, that's the first thing the client does.
Yep.
Afterwards, just implement the factor. It really is becoming a kind of necessary. So definitely that's the incident response plan. I would really emphasize that because of the increase in ransomware over the pandemic. I mean, it's the demand amount, the numbers are going up. More people are at home. The attack surface is broader. The demands are higher. Bitcoin is worth more, so there's more incentive for the criminals to deploy ransomware and try to attack you that way. Having an incident response plan in place with all of your outside team members, your cyber lawyer, your Chris Wisneski's, and so forth, your forensic investigator, obviously your insurance broker, all of those on the phone tree, and you have your game plan, maybe even scripted some scenarios that you can test to test your incident response plan. I think that's the incident response plan is also it's rare to see, sadly, but could really cut out a lot of pain and really minimize the harm.
Yeah, no, that's a good point on that third one. You're absolutely right. When do we see the incident response plan? After the breach, when they realize, it's too late. Yeah, it's going to help you in the future, but that's why we're talking about this, to make sure we equip you so that you are prepared. And unfortunately, with the rise in the amount of investigations we do, I hate to say it, but it's really not if, it's almost when you're going to experience a security incident. It's almost bound to happen. Yeah. So you need to look at it in that aspect also.
Great. We've got another one as well. For the privacy officer, are there a few best practices that they should be doing, and what are they?
So I might jump in on this one.
Yeah, please.
Chris, just so we're clear, a privacy officer in my field tends to be the person responsible for compliance with different privacy regulations, whereas you might also have a security officer or information security officer who has more of a background like Chris's. You might even have that function outsourced. But a privacy officer is, they're concerned about the privacy regulations and making sure that they have a compliance program that is documented and that the organization is getting credit for the things that it's doing to protect consumer data and health data, financial data, whatever the profile is for your business, making sure you have someone doing that. And in our organization, we have the COO actually serves as privacy officer too. Obviously, we work together, he and I. So he's not a lawyer. But he's a point person on the response plan for when things go wrong, with respect to a potential security incident that might lead to a privacy breach. So not every incident leads to a breach, but when it might, you need to involve the privacy officer.
Yep. And that privacy officer, like we did mention, they're responsible for that WISP document, but usually that person is also in tune with the cybersecurity insurance, making sure that that's up to date, that gets renewed. You're not just signing up and just say, yep, we trust, the big companies to do what we want, because I've reviewed some from a large insurance company in Connecticut. We'll just say that. It was 16 pages long, and they actually had zero coverage for cybersecurity. So you need to understand what you're also signing up for, and it need to ensure that it covers what you need. But privacy officer also deals with that.
Great. And if you could look into a crystal ball, look into the future, where do you think these frameworks are headed in the future? Do you think emerging technologies, things like blockchain, are going to become more critical? Do you see things kind of staying standard as they are? But look into your crystal ball, and what are you seeing?
So it's funny, I spoke yesterday on a panel, and that was kind of the big question too. What do we see down the road? What really is the same thing, the crystal ball? I wish I knew, because I'd be very popular. Blockchain's been around for a while. It's got its purposes. I guess really what we see coming down the line, I hope I'm answering this correctly, and is you're still seeing ransomware. A lot of people thought that would go away, but that's actually risen immensely since COVID, only because a lot of people are kind of scrambling on how to operate remotely, and it really screwed things up. As we said, the ransomwares are getting bigger. Phishing attacks are up 666% since COVID started, and that is an actual number, I'm not making that up. 666% since. We're starting to see things like concern of the AI, artificial intelligence. That's something that you're going to see become an issue, right? As learned behavior, we use that for antivirus and anti-spyware and intrusion detection and intrusion prevention systems. And so the artificial intelligence is really important to defend. Well, guess what? The attackers aren't going to sit back. They're starting to use that already, right? They're starting to use that in their box of tools to thwart the opposite side of it. So we're seeing an increase in AI. I've also seen an increase in IoT, Internet of Things. People don't necessarily pay attention to, even at home, with a lot more people working remotely. Now you have your work laptop sitting on your local, router sitting at home that you haven't updated or done anything with for the last 7 years, and it's a default password. But people are using these Internet of Things. So, your refrigerators, your smart TV, your Ring doorbell, they have very poor security around them. And attackers, if they can get into any of those aspects, they can kind of backfeed and get into your router at home and get into your work laptop, wherever it may be. So those are some of the areas I see coming down the chain. I guess if I were to say, what do we see kind of helping, and what do we see that's going to kind of, again, thwart that, is that AI is really going to become bigger and bigger on how we prevent as best as we can by looking at the behaviors and how people are using that.
So I would just add that with respect to the future of cybersecurity frameworks, I think you're going to see more certifications being offered either as a movement within private industry or required by regulation. And I say that because if you look at what's happening with the defense supply chain, the military usually ahead of these things. So the defense supply chain community or ecosystem now has levels of compliance they have to certify to under the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, CMMC.
Yes, CMMC.
That applies to manufacturers in the supply chain. So they're going to have, in order to respond to an RFP, they have to have this certification, depending on what the RFP says, which level is required, 1 through 5. And there's a whole industry springing up to train businesses to be able to get certified. And a lot of those certifications, at least on the lower levels, already correspond to the NIST cybersecurity framework or publication 800-whatever. So companies that were already meeting that, compliance level, they're going to get certified pretty easily. So I think it behooves businesses sooner than later to get on board, adopt a cybersecurity framework. Most of the controls that are in any of the frameworks you'll adopt will likely overlap with each other and whatever certification is coming down the pike, so that there's some level of standards. Certain businesses here in Connecticut are already required to have written information security programs, like insurance companies, insurance businesses, financial institutions, schools, and there's other sectors that are encouraged strongly to have these. So why not go ahead and adopt a framework and get credit for that? When certifications come down the pike, you'll be ready.
There is one thing that a lot of people ask me. They're like, how come there's not a federal law? Why does every state have its own different law with a lot of nuances? We in cybersecurity ask the same question, because every state's law keeps getting more and more comprehensive. As Sherwin said, the GDPR over in the European Union was this huge, groundbreaking, very in-depth program. Well, now California, their Consumer Protection Act, their privacy laws are even more stringent than GDPR. And so I truly believe, after attending enough, conferences and government things, that you will see something come down at the federal level, that there will be some kind of standard, so that at least, some minimal things. Yes, states may be more stringent, but you'll get some kind of, across the board mandates.
Great. Well, again, thank you both for this super informative webinar. I definitely learned a lot, and I hope everybody on this webinar did as well. And also, if you are interested in an assessment, CBIA does do assessments. So Molly, if you wouldn't mind throwing up the slide.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're interested in finding out some more information, feel free to go to the website or reach out to Rob LaChance as well. He has more information if you already know who he is. And again, with that, if there's no additional questions, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Everybody have a good day.